The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show. I'm Charles Christian and thank you very much for tuning in again. This week we've part one of a splendid three-part interview with the Reverend Bill McDonald, in which we discuss everything from UFOs and alien abductions to near-death experiences, the Vietnam War, and we're into the men who stare at goats territory here, meditation and mysticism. I'll be introducing the Reverend Bill in a moment, but first we go urban myth busting to deal with yet another coronavirus fake news stories. Now, according to this story, which has been circulating on social media, the 16th century prophet and mystic Nostradamus predicted the COVID-19 pandemic as long ago as the year 1551. The prediction apparently runs, there will be a twin year, so that'll be the year 2020, this year, yeah, get it, from which will arise a queen, that's the corona bit, who will come from the east, now that's clearly China, and who will spread a plague in the darkness of night on a country with 7 hills. That'll be Italy, because Rome was famously built on 7 hills, and will transform the twilight of men into dust. In other words, death, to destroy and ruin the world. So, pretty grim prophecy, and good old Nostradamus, wasn't he clever to predict the coronavirus 500 years ago? Except he wasn't. As the well-known fact-checking and debunking site Snopes.com points out, not only is this prediction not expressed in the rhyming quatrain format Nostradamus used in all his genuine predictions, but also nothing like this prediction appears in his book Les Prophéties. And this is really the killer, there is no mention of this prediction anywhere until early this spring of this year, 2020. In other words, it is a modern hoax that was created after the pandemic had already started. But no doubt we'll have some more coronavirus fake news next week, like London buses. If you miss one now, there'll be another one along in a minute. Anyway, let's get on to our interview. We're talking to US Army Vietnam veteran, the Reverend Bill McDonald, who is a chaplain, yoga meditation teacher, PTSD consultant, poet, motivational speaker, artist, and who was awarded, among other things, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry. He founded the Spiritual Warrior Ministries, which provides free chaplain services for the military community across the USA. This is an all-faith alliance of ministers, reverends, rabbis, self-ordained chaplains, representing, in Bill's word, a rainbow of faiths and beliefs. The only 2 rules for the ministries is that they should be self-funded and that there is no preaching of any dogma. Bill also founded the Military Writers Society of America to help encourage veterans to express themselves in books, both as an effort to help their post-traumatic shock disorder, as well as to preserve history by recording one vet's personal history at a time. The WSA has over 1,000 members and is recognised as the largest military genre writers group in the world. And Bill is also the author of numerous books, including his autobiography, A Spiritual Warrior's Journey. Now, on with the interview. Reverend Bill, good to speak to you.
Well, it's always good to speak to anybody, especially during these times.
Yes, indeed. Let's go through, I've got your bio here. You're a Army Vietnam vet. You veteran, I should point out, because in case people think you were dealing with pets and things out there. And you're also a chaplain, held the title Reverend, and you won a Purple Heart, did you?
Yeah, I got a Purple Heart. I got a Distinguished Flying Cross, Bronze Star, 14 Air Medals. Got nominated for a bunch more. I was there, and I even got all the trophies to prove it.
Your interest in the paranormal, was it something you've had when you were a kid and were always interested in, or was it the experience of being in combat that first set you off?
Set me off is probably a good term to use with me. I was born like most people, and I came into this world with my own unique personalities. I kind of believe that we come in with certain baggage and certain tendencies called DNA, spiritual DNA, reincarnation, who knows?
Yeah.
Karma. But I came in already at the age of 2 and 3 years old, meditating, seeing ghosts, having visitors, having strange occurrences happening. And at 4 and 5 years old, me and my two sisters, my older sister and my younger sister, were actually abducted. And what's really weird, it was an alien abduction. And that was a term that nobody used back then. In fact, nobody even talked about this. Something happened, and I'll tell you what happened, but it happened like in 1950, 51, around there.
Yeah. And
only the three of us in the household experienced. Everybody else was like cold dead. You screaming or yelling, and everybody sound asleep, which is kind of interesting. But we had this experience as children. The three of us were gone, and then we came back. There was a big time gap, and we didn't talk about that experience. That's like in 50, 51. We didn't talk about that experience till 2003, I think, or 4.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of interesting that you could go, almost 50 years plus, 60, almost 60 years or whatever, and never brought it up. And when I brought it up, my sisters didn't really want to talk. They acknowledged it, but they still had problems with it. Well, it was one evening we moved into this. There was an empty housing complex in Coos Bay, Oregon, and it was abandoned by the government from World War II, where they used to have army dependents in there.
Yeah.
And it was boarded up. And my stepdad, who was a World War II veteran, he was up there, and he was working as a lumberjack. And so he was not making much money. We didn't have any money. And he saw these abandoned houses, all these boarded up, they were triplexes. And they went in one evening, and they tore all the things off the windows, and got a lock for the door, and went in, cleaned it up, and moved in. And to stay out of trouble, they called up the newspaper and did that with the newspaper there, right? Mm-hmm. Saying, as a World War II veteran, he was claiming squatters' rights, and he was taking over this complex because it was abandoned. And the police were getting ready to evict us and everything. And then a guy named Walter Winchell.
Oh, right, yes.
Walter Winchell, the great radio show guy in America.
Yeah.
He may be known in England and other places.
But he is, indeed, yeah.
I mean, good morning, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea, right? He did an interview. He did a broadcast on my mother and this veteran moving into this complex. And so the police were coming to evict us, and then we were a national story. It was like the local, the veteran moves in and takes over this empty thing they were just going to tear down for some Safeway store or something coming in later. And so what happened, within 2 or 3 hours after the broadcast, every single unit, and there must have been 30 of them, they're all broken into, and a veteran moved into every single one of them. So it was like they couldn't evict us. Anyway, so it was this abandoned complex that this abduction happened. It was really weird. It was an evening, a normal evening, and we went to bed, and I'm laying in bed, and I see these, I guess we call them grays.
Yeah.
Coming in, there's 5, 6 of them, half a dozen maybe, and they're they're not too much bigger than me. They're not huge. They're child size. And I'm looking at them, and I'm, of course, wide-eyed, and then, like, wow, what is this? Children already believe there's creatures under the beds, right? The Boogeyman. Yep. So I'm seeing that, and I'm screaming, and my stepdad comes in, and of course, when he turns on the lights and he's there's nothing there, of course, right? And so he says, shut up, go to bed. So he goes, and as soon as he turns off the lights, they come back in through the walls. I mean, they just come in through the walls.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm screaming and yelling, and my stepdad's not coming back. You don't hear anything. My brother, who's sleeping in the other bed, and there's two of us in the room, he's dead asleep. Nothing. I mean, I'm wide awake. I'm looking at this screaming, and I put a blanket, a little kid, you hide under the blankets, right? That's really going to be a hiding place.
Yep.
And I'm hiding under the blankets, and it's like X-ray. I can see through the blankets. I see these grays coming at me. What was different than I see on other movies or broadcast documentaries and movies, they show the grays with just their body. These grays had like a farmer's outfit on, like some kind of jumpsuit or something. There was a coverall. So there was some form of uniform, but they were all dressed the same. And their lips weren't moving, but I got a conversation going. Kind of, they wanted to do something to me, and I'm under the bed, and I'm looking through the blankets. And like, to go back to what I was saying, it was like X-ray. I could see through the blankets. I could see them. It was like the blankets were invisible. So I threw them down, and I'm looking at them, and they got this some kind of instrument. At the time, I was just a little kid. I'm thinking it looked like a quote unquote fishing rod. And they shoved this thing out, and it's got some kind of hook or device or something, and it's trying to hook onto me and do something with my eyes or something. Wasn't sure what they were poking on, and I wasn't going to put up with that. And I got up and I ran out of the room, and I ran into my two sisters' room, and I'm standing next to their bed screaming, and they're wide awake looking at me. And pretty soon they see these grays come in through their bedroom door. And then all three of us are screaming, right? It's
Yep.
And nobody in the whole neighborhood ever said anything about us screaming that night. Nobody. It was like, what? This was about 9 o'clock at night. And so they come to the bed, they're coming, and it's just like they're just walking towards you, and then they're there. And then the sun's coming up. This is the next memory, right, for everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's been collective things in between that I kind of picked up from dreams and stuff later, but at that time, it was just sunrise. And we're in the front room, and I got a wooden hanger in my hand as a weapon. I'm gonna protect myself. So I got a wooden hanger. The three of us are hiding behind the sofa, and I peek over the sofa, and there's two or three of them standing on the other side of the sofa with the sunlight coming through the blinds. See these little filters of light coming, and they're standing there looking at us. And it was kind of like Spock on Star Trek, where he does that V sign with his fingers.
Yeah.
Kind of, but it wasn't exactly that. But he kind of put his hand up, like, or he, whatever gender, puts a hand up, like, in a compassionate way, almost like a paternal way. Was like, it was okay. Don't worry about it, and just like peace, love. It was one of those feelings, and so. My anger went away. My sisters were still scared, but my anger went away for some reason. And we watched them as the sunlight came in. The bodies just kind of started dissolving like little atom sparks, just till it was gone. And then I kept having these reoccurring dreams where I'm in this metal, some kind of metallic, is probably a better word because I don't know if it was a metal or what, some kind of metallic surface room. White, everything white, and there's tables, and I'm on a table, and something's going on, and somebody's trying to tell me everything's going to be okay, and don't worry about it, and my sisters are screaming. So I don't know what that means. It was a dream sequence I kept having, so I don't know if it was related to it or not. It could have just been the after effects, but that was the beginning of visitations. And I'd find myself early in the morning for several years where you're dead asleep, and all of a sudden it's like you just dropped into your body, into your bed like 1,000 pounds. Boom, and there you are. You wake up, right?
Yep.
Or in the middle of the night, just before the sun comes up, I'd feel a hand on my hand, holding my hand or touching me, and then it would wake me up, and I'd look, and of course there's nothing, right? So childhood stuff, maybe, I don't know. But it was interesting before we moved there, we lived in San Francisco on Lake Street, which was a nice neighborhood then, and it's even a better neighborhood now. But we had an old house there, and all of us in the family, my stepfather, my mother, my sisters, my brother, we were getting we called it the visitor. A visitor would ghost or what it was, but something be walking through the house and the bedrooms at night. And you think that'd be strange that everybody in the house wouldn't be like, what's going on here? Like my mother would say, oh, it's just a visitor. What in the heck's the visitor, right? So one night, my stepdad, he was a World War II vet, as I stated, and they didn't call it PTSD back then. They called it battle fatigue or whatever it was. You come back, you're all rattled. But he used to carry a gun. He had a 38. He had this little revolver, and he'd have it under his pillow, in case the enemies came, I guess. But he started getting rattled by this, right? And he'd be out there. And one night he's walking around and he's in the halls, and I opened the door, and there he's in the hall with this gun. So I definitely want to stay. I don't want to be wandering around the house, right? But he claimed that he saw these visitors, and he chased them, and they went through the window, and he got really spooked. And that was just before we moved, and it seemed like that same kind of energy us to the state of Oregon. So that was kind of the beginning, and then I started having, I don't know if it was coincidental or not, but I had nosebleeds. I'd have bloody noses all the time. Wake up in the morning, there's blood all the time. And what's really interesting, when I went to the Veterans Administration, the VA hospital here in Sacramento area, about 2 years ago. And I was having some trouble with things, circulation and stuff. And they said, well, let's take an MRI of your wrist. So they looked at my left wrist, and the guys, I think it was an MRI, whatever, they look at what wasn't an X-ray. So he's looking at that, and he goes, well, I see you got a piece of shrapnel or a bullet or something in here. And I go, no. He goes, oh, no, here it is on the screen. There's this little odd-shaped little piece of ceramic, metal, some kind of object. It was not flesh. It wasn't bone.
Yeah.
And, because I was wounded and all, but I didn't get any shrapnel. You'd know if you got shrapnel on the wrist, right? I mean, you'd know. Yeah, I forgot about that. No. So the guy goes, you want us to take it out? And I go, no, but it's interesting. It's there. I mean, it's like, what is it? Right? So that's the first I've learned of that. I don't know if those two things and the bloody noses or my abilities that really got sharpened on metaphysical, spiritual range, ESP and things like that. I don't know if any of that's all related or part of the same process or what. But since I was little, I always had it. And it was like my little sister, Marcia, her and I would play these mind games. I'm like 6, and she's like 4. And we'd take a deck of cards, and the idea was you take the whole deck, 52, shuffle it, and then one of us would look at it and send the mind message. This is an ace of spades, 8 of clubs, 4 of diamonds, whatever it was, right? And the other person had to correctly guess, not that it's just a face card or just a 6 or a number. It had to be suit and number correctly. And then otherwise it didn't count. And we'd do this game, and she'd get 16 to 20 correct, which I think is pretty darn good. And I'd get 28 to 40 sometimes. And at the time I thought, oh, it's a fun game. But I'm looking at the odds on that. How could you guess, let's say 40 correct?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, that's unusual. So we used to do these games, me and my little sister. We would lay out on this little hillside back of the house and in Oregon, and we'd look up at the clouds, and we'd pick a cloud each, right? And we'd have a contest if we could move it the farthest or dissolve it. And you know what? With your mind, or at least with a child's mind, I could dissolve a cloud. I could move it. I could stop it from moving. So at the time, these were the kind of games we were playing, and never thought anything special about it. So you asked me if I got something happened to get me into this metaphysical stuff, or this, as your show would say, the weird stuff.
Yeah.
It always was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then in high school, 1963, November 22nd, you remember that date?
Mm-hmm.
It's history. That's the day Kennedy was assassinated. So the week before, I'm having all these dreams, these crazy dreams in black and white, not colored, dreams in black and white, showing the president getting shot, showing little John Jr. saluting, showing the carriage at the near the White House, pulled down the streets. The whole thing. I seen the whole thing, and so I go to my school principal, and I said, "Hey, somebody's going to shoot the president." I dreamt it. You could say that then, and people just go, "He's crazy." And if I said that now, I'd probably have the FBI, Secret Service, Homeland Security. I'd have them all at my doorstep and confiscating my computer and questioning my family. So back then you could say something and you were crazy. That's all, right? So, and then it happened, just like I told a bunch of people, and it kind of spooked people. And but to me, I knew it was going to happen. Now the only difference was when I saw the Kennedy assassination. Mine was different than official reports. Official reports says it was one guy, Harvey Lee Oswald, and that was it, right? But in mine, I saw somebody else. I saw him getting shot from the back from another area, and there was something going on in the grass area, but there was something going on in the vehicle behind him as well. So maybe my vision wasn't totally 100% accurate, because I got to argue with my government, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, could the government be wrong? Could the government be hiding something? Come on, let's get real. That's my government. I can't say that. So I saw something different, and it came off differently in my dream. And then I traveled Europe, and I went to Hawaii, and I studied with the Kahuna. There's another whole story there. It's Kahuna religion. But I ended up getting drafted and going into the army, and ended up in Vietnam. And that's where some really, really interesting things occurred. And not just to me, but also to people that have opened up to me over the years. Because when I tell my tales, tell my stories, my experiences, it seems to give freedom to other people to express it. There was a guy, he was a Jewish guy. He was one of the first. If he wasn't the first, he was one of the first, one of the first, second, or third Top Guns coming out of the Top Gun flight school. He was a Marine pilot. And I became friends with him. And he told me a story that he put it in a book later. But when he was flying over North Vietnam, and he has there's two of them. He's got the co-pilot is a navigator, I guess, or the gunner. I don't know what. I'm not a Navy guy or Marine guy, but he's flying off off of an aircraft carrier in the Tonkin Gulf, and he flies in. So there's two of them in this cockpit, and they're getting shot at by SAM missiles and all kinds of stuff coming up at him, and it's getting really heavy, and he's getting damaged. He gets, he's losing fuel. He's taking some hits, and he's getting ready to eject. And he's just over the water right off the shore. And he looks out on his wing, and he sees what he said was a baby angel, this little child angel, like, a little angel out there, 23, 4 or 5 years old, an angel, looking at him and smiling and waving, right? And he thinks, my God, I'm losing my mind. Losing my mind, right? This is nuts, right? So he ejects, and he's parachuting down, and of course there's patrol boats coming after him in the water, And then they got a Jolly Green Giant coming in to pick him up, and they're suppressing with air fire. So he barely gets rescued, gets out of there, and he's afraid to tell anybody because, I mean, they think he's cracking up, right? He's an officer. I think when I met him, he was retired colonel, full board colonel. So he was like one step below a general. I don't know what he was then. So he tells me the story, and I go, well, that's really interesting, because I believe a lot of stuff. And then he says, no. He says, it gets better. I said, what do you mean? He says, I'm getting ready to write my book. And I got my granddaughter, about 3-4 years old, sitting on my lap. And I've never really told her any stories about my war experiences or anything, flying. And she, didn't bother telling her those kind of stories. And she's sitting on my knee one day, and she looks at me and she says, Grandpa, you remember that time you were flying in the war and you were getting shot down and I was sitting on your wing? She said, before I was born, I was sitting on your wing. Remember that? That's what this little kid is telling him. His granddaughter's telling him this. How she was sitting on his wing, looking after him. And when he told me the story, I knew it was truthful because I just looked in his eyes and it was like teared up and tears rolling down his cheek and everything. But it just, you could tell it moved him to tell. And you can see why he didn't share it forever, right? Because it's like people think you're nuts. And then he told me another story about his UFO encounter over in North Vietnam. And I've had people come forth. Apparently there was a lot of UFO encounters in Vietnam. His was kind of interesting because he's flying again with his wingman. And I guess the wingman flew off, and there's the two of them in this thing. And they look out there and they see this, this thing skirting around through the sky in front of them and all around them and up and down. And they're going to bomb in North Vietnam. And it was really kind of crazy. They thought it was maybe an advanced enemy aircraft, maybe something they got from the Chinese or the Russians. They couldn't figure it out because it was just darting through the sky. So they got closer, and this thing, they could tell it was some kind of object. It was some kind. I don't know if it was cigar shaped, but it wasn't your normal flying saucer, but it was kind of like oblong or something. It was different, but it was changing directions, and stop and turn. Stuff that aircraft can't do. So he's trying to keep up with it. It's going faster beyond him. And so he makes a mistake of calling into the aircraft carrier to the flight deck. And he tells the guy, he says, tells him what he's seeing, right? And he says, I guess he was a colonel then or something. He says, Colonel, do you really want to report a UFO? You want me to write this down? And he asked that in a way like, this is your career, right?
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
And he says, okay, you got an unidentified bogey, right? Yeah, I got an unidentified bogey. He says, follow it, see where it goes, right? So they followed it practically into Cambodia. It just crossed the border. And then it disappeared. But it was interesting, for his career advice thing, they told him, no, you followed a bogey. It wasn't Russian, they didn't know what it was. Don't report it. So then I had a friend, a guy named Lee, and he was an infantry soldier in the 9th Infantry Division in Vietnam, and he was over there around the same time I was. I was there in 66, 67. He was sometime in that time frame, maybe 68. And he's out on patrol. And while he's out on patrol at night, I don't know how many combat veterans are listening, but some military guys there in the UK would probably know as well. At night, what you do when you stop for an encampment, you make a circle, everybody facing outwards, and you sleep. And every other guy would be awake. And then every 2 hours, you wake up your buddy, and he's awake, facing outside, he's looking out. So in case anybody comes from any direction, you got 360 degrees covered. If you can visualize that.
Yeah.
All right, so it's the middle of the night, and my buddy is totally asleep. He said it was so quiet that what woke him up was the sound of the ants crawling in the sand next to his head. That's how quiet it was.
Yeah.
I go, what? He told me that. I goes, yeah, I can hear this. I can hear these ants crawling in the sand. So, and he looks around and he sees every other guy looking up at the sky and dazed, and he goes, what the hell's happening? What's going on? Right. So he asked this guy, And so the guy next to him tells him, he says, well, for about 20 minutes or something, there was this object that was hovering over the group of these guys. And it was only about 100 feet or something above them, and they could see the lights and movement and circles and, things going, but no real noise. It was quiet. So what kind of aircraft this was made no sound. So it wasn't a helicopter. You would hear a helicopter. And it was there, and not one guy fired at it, which is interesting, right? Nobody, got mesmerized, and they were all watching it. And he goes, no way, man, this is a joke, man. You pulled me. So he went around and asked 2 or 3 guys around different parts of the circle, and they all had the same story. So what was it, right? He asked me that question. Well, I don't know. Same guy, a few months later, or before, I don't know what the sequence was, but he's crossing a dry rice paddy, which makes you a sitting target. You're in this big, there's nothing to hide behind out there.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, him and his team squad, machine gun opens up on him. There's rounds going all over the place. And he cries out, God, help me. And just like that, he's about 100 to 200 feet away in a tree line behind a tree, just instantaneously transported behind a tree. And he's looking at his buddies getting shot out there. Instead of going crazy, like, how'd I get there? His thought was, I don't remember his buddy's name, so I'll make up a name. He goes, please help Leroy. And then Leroy ends up behind a tree with him. So there's the 2 of them watching the battle behind these trees, totally safe. And they don't know how they got there. So, and I'm thinking that's a crazy story. And then this other guy came, another lieutenant colonel, retired, Army. And he's on a patrol, and there's only like 5 of them or 6 of them. They're on a little patrol, on night patrol. But the night they go out, it's a full moon night. And if you're trying to be discreet and camouflaged and not be seen, that's not a good night to be out walking, right?
Yep.
So, and they come to an open spot, just grasses, short grass. And all of a sudden he sees lit cigarettes. You can tell in the distance from the shadows, people walking, you can see the lit cigarettes these guys are smoking, and you can hear them talking. It's the Viet Cong. These guys are walking towards them. And so they freeze. And he just crouches down. And he can see them plainly. And he's looking at them, and he goes, I can see them. They obviously can see me, right? But they just keep walking right towards them, closer and closer and closer. And pretty soon, it's like he could touch them if he just reached out about 5 or 6 inches. Their uniforms practically hit each other. And he could smell the smoke from the cigarettes. He could hear their words. And they walk right past him and the rest of the guys, crouched down, dead open, full moon, all lit up. And they walk by, and these guys just like, why didn't they see us? Days later, his mother sends him a letter, and she says she was praying for him, and she tells what time she was praying for him. I don't know if she was praying for him at home or church or whatever, but he looks at the time that she was praying for his safety, and it was a time that he was on the patrol.
Mm-hmm.
She was visualizing Jesus protecting him and praying for him to be loved and protected, and it just coincidentally, if you can believe that word, coincidentally happened to be the exact time these guys didn't see him. So I hear stories like that all the time from my veterans, and I'm thinking there are more normal circumstances like that than meets the eye.
Mm-hmm.
Over there, and I knew who was going to get killed. I knew who was going to get wounded. I knew which helicopters were going to crash. I pretty much knew what was going to happen. And it's a good thing and a bad thing. Good thing it kept me alive. Bad thing is you tell somebody don't get on the helicopter and it crashes and they get killed. They didn't listen to you. You didn't change their destiny.
Yeah.
In other words, I didn't have control over anybody's free will or destiny, and that was hard on me because I come back thinking, well, I knew this was going to happen. I'll give you an example. We had an incident where I come back flying combat mission, and my helicopter was due for maintenance. Every so many hours you fly, it has to go in for maintenance. And so when it's in maintenance, that's my day off because I'm the crew chief door gunner on a Huey. That's an iconic helicopter you see in the old Vietnam War movies.
Yeah.
And so my sergeant comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, Mac," because when you're McDonald, everybody's Mac in the Army, right?
Yeah.
So the curse of the Scots and the Irish, right? Everybody's Mac. So there I am. And he says, "Hey, we got a shortage of people. Would you mind flying this other aircraft tomorrow? We don't have a crew chief. We don't have guard diners. And it's got to go. We got this mission tomorrow." And I said, "Yeah, no problem. I don't need a day off. I'll do it." But when I went to the helicopter and I approached it to do an inspection, to do the routine nightly maintenance on it, when I touched the skin of the helicopter, which is a real thin metal, not much thicker than a beer can, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's lightweight. But I touched it, and it's going to take me much longer to tell you what I saw and felt and knew because what happened was instantaneous. It was like when I touched it, all this knowledge came to me. When I touched it, I saw this helicopter in the sky over the jungle, and I saw the blades freeze up. Something wrong with the rotor, and it froze up, and this, the helicopter starts spinning, twist, and flies apart, and it crashes on top of this canopy of jungle, and it explodes into fire. And I see all these bodies laying there on fire. I see everybody dead, and all that instantaneous, just like that. And I could feel the heat on my hands. So I go to my sergeant and I said, "Hey, that thing's going to crash and burn. Something wrong with it." "Well, what's wrong with it?" "I think there's something wrong with the rotor head, I think." I said, "I ain't going to let it fly." And I put in the logbook on a Huey, on a helicopter, or any aircraft, the crew chief or a mechanic can put a red X on this little log they got there. That means it needs to be checked out. It's not flyable. It has to have a safety inspection. It has to have tech inspectors come look at it. And so they come to me and they go, "Okay, what's wrong with it?" So I can't tell them I had this vision. So I tell them, "Something's wrong with the rotor." So they sent 3 or 4 mechanics over. They checked it. Nothing. I said, "No, there's something wrong with it. And I ain't flying on it. And nobody else should either." And I told my CO, and then my commanding officer says, "Hey, you're flying on it. And if you don't fly on it, I'm going to court-martial you." And I said, "Okay, do whatever you got to do. I'll fly another aircraft tomorrow and do whatever you want to do with me. But that's going to crash. It's going to burn. You shouldn't send anybody out on it, because whoever goes out on that aircraft is never, ever coming back." And I was dead serious. And of course, the commanding officer thought I was nuts. So he says, "Okay, we'll deal with this tomorrow." So I walked back into the second flight platoons. They got like a hooch. I don't know what you call them anywhere else. We call them hooches. It was just a wooden building halfway up, and then there was a wire screen to keep the bugs out, and a metal room. Something really simple. We got about 20 guys in there. And there's this new guy, and he's putting stuff in his locker, and his name was Charles Durrell. Let's see, Alger. Actually, it was Alger Durrell. And so Al's standing there, and the guys are welcome there. He just transferred in. He had one of the easiest jobs in Vietnam during the war. He was one of the computer guys. Now, realize in 1967, a computer guy basically was punching IBM cards, putting it in a machine, and went, then spit things. And there was all these reels of stuff going. And it's not like today's. I mean, I got more power in my cell phone than he had in that, right?
Yeah.
But he had an air-conditioned office. They put him up in a hotel in Saigon. He had a maid. He ate in restaurants. I mean, he had a maid. But he said, I came here to fight. So I want to be a door gunner." He volunteered to be a door gunner on a Huey helicopter. Now, in the military, I mean, it's hazardous duty being in the military regardless, right? But if you volunteer for airborne, jumping out of an airplane, or if you volunteer for aviation, flying in the aircraft, that's hazardous duty. You get special pay for those. Like infantrymen don't risk their lives, I always used to say, right? I mean, what's their hazardous pay, right? But you had to be a volunteer to be in an aircraft. And so to be a door gunner is something you had to ask for.
Yeah.
So he came in, he didn't have a flight physical, didn't have any flight equipment, he didn't have a helmet, he had nothing. And so I'm introduced to the guy, and they say, "Hey, Mac, this is the new guy, Al." And when I shook his hands, I knew he was a dead man walking. That expression wasn't there back then.
Yeah.
But the equivalent of was, I knew he was dead. I mean, it was like, this guy's going to get killed. And I told him, I looked him right in the eye, and I'm just getting introduced to him, this friendly introduction, right? And I'm saying, don't go out tomorrow because you'll never come back. You'll be killed. Whatever you do, don't let them ship you off anywhere. And don't get on aircraft. And I gave him the number. And the guy's looking at me like, what a wacko, man. How long has this guy been here, right? And a couple of guys chuckled nervously and all that kind of stuff. And I got teary-eyed. I was serious. I said, seriously, don't go out tomorrow. You're never coming back. And everybody got silent. I think when I left the room, they probably laughed at me. Yeah, crazy Mac, So the next day I get up, the aircraft's sitting there. They don't have anybody for it. Good. I fly on a combat mission. I'm out there shooting and getting shot at. I had my dangers that day. I come back and it's about 4:00 in the afternoon. And that aircraft's gone. The one I said, don't take out.
Mm-hmm.
So I get mad. And I go to the commanding officer's office. And I go, here's me an E5, right? Just like a sergeant E5. I was a specialist E5. And I go, hey, you took that aircraft out. And he goes, hey, you, I'm the commanding officer. I can do whatever the hell I want. You don't tell me what to do. We sent it out. And I said, where's it at? He says, well, actually, it's overdue a few hours. And I'm going, what? I go, there's only 2 or 3 hours worth of fuel on it, right? Mm. And so it can't be overdue. It's got to be on the ground someplace by now. It's not flying. It's someplace on the ground. And he said, well, we don't know where it's at. It was on some little special missions today. We used it. We couldn't find a full crew. So we only had one door gunner because you weren't there. You weren't the other door gunner, crew chief. So we sent it out with just one. And they picked up guys during the day and made whoever they picked up sit behind the other gun. And so the thing went out short. One crew member just had 3 crew members, 2 pilots and 1 door gunner. There's a guy going out, had no experience, none, 0. And so finally, they decided to send out a recovery search team. And they were joking around with each other because they didn't know where to go. They had no idea where it was at. And so one of the pilots goes, well, how about that crazy Mac? He seems, he said he was going to crash. Let's ask him, where's it at, right? Because I said, I'll go, number one. And they said, well, where's it at? So we get up and I just point off in a direction. And unbelievably, they follow my directions, right? I point towards the horizon in one direction. I don't know what degrees it was.
Yeah.
So we take off. We're flying about 10, 15 minutes, and we see a glow like a fire. And we keep going. It's getting dark now. It's sunset. And there's a forest fire. And in the middle of this forest fire, we fly over it. There's a twisted, crashed, beat up, torn up helicopter, burned up. And there's all these burnt bodies laying in the jungle. I had a rope. I was getting ready to go down with my weapon and check to see for any survivors. I was stopped because they didn't know if there was VC on the ground. And frankly, I don't think these guys wanted to hang around and get shot at. They didn't know why I was down. So the next day they sent in a tank and an infantry, a couple of squads, and they recovered it. And I went back the next day and found that everybody had been killed. And then, of course, here's the way the military mind works. Here's the government, right? I predicted it was going to crash, right? I refused to fly on it. So therefore, if I said it was going to crash, only way I can know it was going to crash is done something to it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Guilty as I killed these guys, apparently, right? So they send in I don't know what the initials are. You got like, the military has their own investigation unit.
Yeah.
CID? Is that what it is? CID? I don't know, whatever the something like that.
Yeah.
NCIS is the Navy and the Marines, and I think CID is the Army. So these guys come in, these 2 officers come in, and they bring me into a hot tent. It's about 101 degrees outside, and it's a canvas tent, and they got me under a 150-watt bulb, literally hanging over my head, sitting on a stool. I mean, just like in the movies, right? And these 2 guys are grilling me for like a full day. All right, tell us again for the 15th time, right? Tell us again why you think this helicopter, and I tell them the same story, I wouldn't change that. And they said, it's impossible for you to know that. You've done something. We know you've done something. You sabotaged that. And we're going to be watching everything you do for the rest of your life. And someday we're going to prove it. And we're going to put you in Fort Leonard Wood forever. I said, I ain't changing my story. That's it, right? So nobody said anything. And then I put up a website and I talked about that and I wrote in my book. And one of my officers from my unit, the pilot, said, "Hey, I dug up the maintenance records on that and it shows it crashed." He says, "Get ready for this. It crashed because the head of the rotor, there's a Tunyon bolt or there's some kind of screw in there or something in there that messed up and froze up and it made it stop." And you can't, and you're going, 1,000 RPMs a minute or something. All of a sudden now it's dead stop. The helicopter's going to twist it and everything. So it was exactly what I said it was, something wrong with the rotor head. And they knew that, according to the records, within a week or 2 or 3 weeks at the most after interviewing me. And they never came back to tell me, "Oh, you're cleared," right? So then another incident happened, and I'm tying these two together because later on I'm contacted by the CIA. Then we'll get into that part if we have time. We have time for. Okay. So I get assigned on standby. There's a insertion of Arvin Rangers. Arvin Rangers is the army of South Vietnam.
Yes. Yeah.
It's our allies, right? So they're being inserted into this Delta area, not too far from the Ho Chi Minh Trail ends. And coming down this Ho Chi Minh Trail was, according to intelligence reports, 500 North Vietnamese regular troops, mingling with some of the what they call the VC, the Viet Cong.
Yeah.
So the North Vietnamese coming down. So this is a hardcore unit, and they're taking on these Rangers. And so our helicopter unit was dropping these Rangers in because they're allies. And 9 helicopters went in, and every one of them received fire. Some of them had bullet holes and damage and stuff, but they all went back to the base to repair, and it was getting too hostile in the air. And it left us. We were what they call the CNC, the Command and Control Ship. In other words, our job was to fly over the battlefield, watching the battle down below and giving radio instructions to the ground troops, move here, do there, they're over there. And we had the commanders for those units in our helicopter. And then all of a sudden these commanders go, "We need to be on the ground with these guys because we need to tell them what's going on." Well, it turns out that one of those officers was a double agent. He was in the South Vietnamese army, but he was actually working for the other side.
Right.
Anyway, didn't know that when we're approaching. So now we're coming into the battle area, and there's stuff it's really close combat. So I'm given orders from Saigon radio saying, helicopter, whatever we were, right, whatever, Tomahawk 1-1, whatever we were, don't fire. There's friendlies on the ground. Meaning I can't fire I can't even fire back at anybody, right? So I said, well, I'm not going to look like that. I'm at least going to point the machine gun at somebody, right? Because they don't know what I get my orders are. So we're coming down and figure 500 bad guys, and now they only got one aircraft coming in, and we're coming in low and slow to land, and everybody opens fires on us. And the sky, I don't know if you've ever seen movies where they show tracers in the air, and you get red ones and white ones. You get different colored ones depending if they're NATO or or communist or whatever. But we got these red and white tracers coming, and they're hitting the aircraft. You can hear this, and you could feel this sound, kind of like puncturing beer cans, just pop, 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 the tail end, and rounds are zinging through this helicopter. I got the doors off it, so the rounds are coming, right through the open part, and we land. All those guys get off. The traitor, remember him? I'm talking about the traitor guy.
Mm-hmm.
He steps about 10, 20 feet away, maybe 20, but someplace just out of arm's reach. And he's got his magazine. He points his automatic weapon on. It could have been an AK-47. It was one of those kind of weapons. I mean, I wasn't sitting there analyzing it.
Yeah.
Points his weapon at me. Just as I turn around, I see this flash of white light coming at me. He's got an 18-round clip in this thing, and he fires all 18 rounds. This one round hits me right in the chest, right in the heart. Boom. It just so happened coincidentally, remember that?
Yep.
Coincidentally, 3 days before, they came to the company trying to get somebody to wear this big, heavy ceramic chest protector that they needed somebody to guinea pig, so they picked me and my gunner. So, okay, we'll do it. But it was like awkward, heavy, it's hot, So we took the front plate we left on, and the back plate, we go, what do we need a back plate for? So we took the back plate and slid it underneath our canvas seat. We're sitting on a canvas seat, meaning any rounds coming up just went through canvas, which is not going to stop anything. So I thought I'll put that down there just in case I get a round up that hits my spine or vital parts of necessary anatomy I have. So not like getting shot in the butt in the middle of combat, right? So no, I'll put it there. So anyway, so that's a backstory. So now we get there, I get shot in the heart. I got that in my chest. Third day I've been wearing it. The third day. I mean, I've been there 6-8 months. Just the third day. It blows this big hole in it, and I get ceramic chips flying in my face, air and smoke. And contrary to what you see in the movies and television, the guy's wearing a protective vest or something, it knocks you down. It's like a mule kicking you. I mean, the breath is taken out of you. You get hit with an AK-47 round, right? It's like you stopped it, but boom, and I'm back against this wall of the helicopter. And at the same time it hits me, the cord to my helmet, to the sound system, breaks. So all of a sudden I'm listening to Armed Forces Radio, which was actually playing the Rolling Stones. I'm going into battle listening to "You Can't Get No Satisfaction," all this stuff's going on, right? I mean, it was like insane. That's insanity, right? In the war, listening to Rolling Stones and the guy getting shot, right? It's a memory you can't make up. So I'm sitting there, and there's fuel flowing all over outside the aircraft because they hit all the fuel, they hit the hydraulic fluids. I wasn't worried about the fuel because you got fuel cells that kind of self-seal a little bit. You don't lose much. But it was the hydraulics leaking. I could tell and that controls all the stuff. So we pick up off the runway. We're just shot after shot after shot is coming after us. I mean, and we limp through the sky about 50 feet in the air, maybe. And we just go just away from these guys. And we make a unscheduled landing in the middle of this field, right? Kaboom, dust and everything, right? And I'm looking around, and I go, I guess I'm alive, right? I mean, I didn't know if I was dead or alive because I look down there and I see my heart with flames still shooting out of my vest, which is kind of a spooky thing, right? And I'm going, well, I guess I'm alive, right? And then I got blood on my hand from shrapnel or something. And so I go around and open up the door to let the pilot out on my side. You have to slide back this armored plate that he has there to protect him. The pilots sit up there, they got armored plates, and they're sitting in an armored chair, and they got all this stuff. The door gunners are sitting back on a canvas chair with no doors or nothing, totally open, right? So, who do they value, right? So anyway, I got him out. Now, my gunner's supposed to get out and do the same thing to the other guy on the other side. Co-pilot. He ain't moving. I'm going over to him.
Good day, gentlefolk. I doth have breaking news. Your Weird Tales host, Charles Christian, has written a new book called Saints and Sinners in Dark Age England. 5 shocking true tales that are stranger than fiction. There's murder, mayhem, treason, incest, adultery, and worse. Read about the real antics of 9 saints. Yes, saints. 8 kings and 5 queens of England, plus the wickedest of all stepmothers. And be amazed, or horrified, or appalled, or all 3. If you love weird history, and methinks you do, hop over to Amazon for your copy of Charles Christian's Saints and Sinners in Dark Age England. Grab yours now.
And that's it. We're almost out of time. We'll have the second part of our interview with the Reverend Bill next week. However, let's just squeeze in one final story. It's about Waterloo Teeth, otherwise known as deadmen's dentures. The name derives from a practice in the 18th and 19th centuries of dentures, that's false teeth, being made from the teeth extracted from soldiers who'd been killed on the battlefield. The point being the casualties were all usually young, relatively able-bodied men, so their teeth hadn't had time to decay, unlike those taken from people who had died from disease or old age. And indeed, many of the resurrectionists or grave robbers, along with stealing the corpses for anatomy, they also would steal them for their teeth to be sold, to be used in dentures. Ugh. Anyway, one of the highlights of this grim business, if that's the right word, was the Battle of Waterloo in 1851, when thousands of young men perished on the battlefield after Napoleon Bonaparte made his final bid for military glory. Apparently, the quantity of teeth collected then was so huge, there were around 50,000 dead on that battle, that they were shipped back to England in barrels where they were sorted, boiled and sold. And before you say, ugh, the Brits were really disgusting, there was a similar trade in dead men's teeth during the American Civil War 45 years later. On a cultural note, you'll recall that the ill-fated Fantine in the movie and in the musical Les Miserables sells her teeth while she is still alive in the hope of raising some money, while George Washington, lest we forget the first president of the United States, had dentures made from teeth pulled from the mouths of his slaves who were still alive. If you want to learn more, and you probably don't, check out the article Fake Smiles on the Surgeons Hall Museums.wordpress.com website. And that really is it. Now it just remains for me to say, this is Charles Christian saying, we're living in weird times. So until the next time we're together, stay well, stay safe, stay different.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic and folklore. You can keep in touch with us online at www.weirdtalesradio.com, by email to weirdtales@icloud.com, and on Twitter @ChristianUncut. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Good night.